Hello once again, everyone. So, I was going to continue some of my series today, but unfortunately that is not going to be possible. So, instead I decided let's just go over something that I haven't really talked about, or that anyone's really talked about too much length as far as I know, that being just the variety of ways you can hold a spear, and from there the variety of purposes or applications that you can find for those grips. So first off, let's talk about something really important that I think goes over a lot of people's heads. That being where in relation to your core your hands are. So there's a couple different places we can put them. One of the most common things I see is that people stand with their right hand or their backhand really behind their hip. For the majority of your low play, you do not want this. You want your hand to be parallel to your hip. So both of my arms are now somewhat in front of me. This is a minor thing, but it makes a huge difference. Now, at the very least, I am applying a lot of energy forward. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, but everything is ready to go. Versus if it's back here, unintentionally, now this presence is a lot closer to me, and I'll have to apply it forward, as opposed to it almost already being forward. I like to think of this as sort of holding a guard forward, like a literal guard here. All the tension, all the pressure should be right out of the top of my left hand, and my right hand being tied to my hip helps with that greatly. Now, another way that you can hold this is going to be same idea. Above, that one most people don't pull back too much, so we will talk about that again in a minute. Just above, and then of course there is also lower to your shoulder. These kind of three main points are going to be what I'm looking for, i.e. the backhand is always on this central line of my right shoulder, my right hip, or if I'm playing from left side, it is on my left shoulder and my left hip, respectively. So, first let's talk about what you're looking to do. If we're talking about field guards, which are going to be positions that you're taking more often than not because you are fighting either as part of a formation or you're at greater range, then here are some of the following ones. First off is going to be your bog standard, just forward sort of position. You see this a lot in regards to any sort of spear work, but a lot of partisan work as well. The chest is upright, the knees are bent, and both thumbs are held to the tip. This gives me a great hinging point from which I can work into a couple different positions. I can have my tip forward, I can have my tip low by raising my backhand, or I can raise my backhand and now move into more of a high guard version. And I can have those sort of three hinging points that I can work off of. Very good way of fighting, as I can open myself up, close that same opening, and execute thrusts from therein. Now another option, and this you'll want a little bit more in your backhand, is going to be thumb to thumb. This can still hinge in the same way, but more often than not, this is going to be a bit more stalwart. This is particularly good if you're looking to really fight tight in with a formation, as opposed to more extended. This tends to bring you a little bit closer, a little bit hardier. It's going to make things slightly harder to be knocked aside, as well as easier for you to push things over to a side, which is going to be quite good for you if you're more focused on fighting in the timber forest that is two blocks of people pushing together, as opposed to fighting as an individual. So this can be very, very good for sweeping quite a bit in front of you. From here, I can also, of course, hinge upward very, very easily. So if my tip is being pushed down, just hinge that backhand, and I can bring it back in, no problem. Now, from these kind of two, there's also one more position, that being its lowered form, and then its forward form on both. So with this, it doesn't make much sense for me to lower too extremely. I'm better off just hinging slightly and almost ending up kind of like I'm holding Bum Tog with my right hand, as we'll get to again later, but it's a bit more across me. This isn't necessarily all that useful position to fight from. If you are going to lower from here, you're better off lowering a bit more into a schrunklet, as you see in a lot of the armored guards. This is going to be very useful for then sweeping across by just bringing my right hand to my hip, and if I add a little bit of movement with that, I can very easily create good overbinds. Though, you can still get some nice things out of here, just not quite as nice as if you have thumbs to tip, and I hinge low. That's going to give a lot more pressure. But thumbs to tip, I can also move into more of an extended forward guard. And this can be given to a couple different places, be it in the middle, off to my right, or off to my left. Off to my right, I am able to sweep upward with my attacks. This can be quite good. Off to my left, I get that same thing I just talked about as in the schrunklet, boom, but because it's going to be weaker, you'll usually want to use a little bit of your back foot in conjunction with this a la Myers quarterstaff. So some options there. Now when it comes to the extended version, then we're going to start to see some things. So for extending with this, for the easiest attack on both grips is going to be just loosening your lead hand and pushing your backhand until they are connected. This is called a flung thrust. This is a very easy attack to launch. Not necessarily all that great for dealing with armor, but certainly good if you're going for an unarmored target like a face, or alternatively a lightly armored opponent. This can be a good quick way of launching an attack. The same mechanic as well can also be used if you are caught. You can flung thrust in reverse to recover your tip back. We'll talk about that again in a moment. Same thing can of course be done here. It's not going to feel quite as good, but it's absolutely still doable. This one I find feels a little better from above, but that's my personal preference. Now, the next form of attack is going to be bringing our arms up with a small straightening of our back leg. So for thumbs to tip, what I want to do is I want to bring the butt up against my chest as I push forward. This is a very good hinging point. It means that I'm bringing it to my center as opposed to thrusting from the side, which means I can aim very naturally with the rest of my body. When it comes to thumb-to-thumb grip, same exact thing applies, no real change. Now following this, we of course also have the ability to couch. Now when it comes to couching, you can either make it as an extension of one of the thrusts I just did, or you can go from the get-go. So if I'm going to do it from the get-go, I usually want a little bit of extra, since I'm going to be moving in tighter. We'll talk about this again in a moment. But I'm still pushing forward. Don't treat this as I'm extending my lead arm and just bringing this. It is I am pushing both forward to drive my shoulder, which is now locked into that spear, into target. Think of this in the same way that you think of a thrust from Fluke. I am driving my tip forward, not just pinching it. And then, of course, from thumb to thumb, it's actually even perhaps a little bit easier. It really locks in particularly nicely. Boom, because I can also hinge this downward, create sort of almost a triangle between my tip and then the tips of my two elbows. That really, really locks things out and gives me a lot of pushing power. Now, if you do these on the end of a thrust, so for example, let's say I had thrust once and made it onto target but haven't pushed yet, then usually you might want to slightly advance or gather. So with thumbs to tip, I find a passing step to be kind of nice, personally. You can still do the gathering step, of course, but I personally like passing on thumbs to tip. Not quite sure why. Maybe it just activates more sword stuff in my brain, but I place, push. That also brings up my shoulder as I bring forward my hip and can really add a lot of pressure into it. Now, with thumb to thumb, same exact idea, just boom. This one, though, I don't tend to like to push. This one, instead, I feel much better gathering, and gathering is usually the thing you want to be doing, but I'll hit, I've placed on, now I'm going to bring my back foot up as I couch, 1, 2, and I shove that shake forward. Here's that again, place, 1, 2, and I just drive that shake forward as I push into target. And both can be done with either way, it's just, that's the way I like them both to feel personally. So, could you couch over a flung thrust? Not really. Once it's extended, that butt is gone. But if you are looking to specifically couch, like maybe you're in armor and you're fighting armor and you know you're going to, then because you can afford to be a little closer to target, you can also start playing with a bit more staff on the back end. This is not a bad thing at all, as I can still do all of my normal spear stuff, I can still flung thrust, I can still do either grip. It's just now I have a little bit extra, which is not only going to mean that I can recover faster, because there's less stick out there, but also that I can bring this end over to start using it in a variety of contexts. We'll get back to that in a moment. For now, let's go ahead and move up the body to the point forward fellow, that being the high guards. Now, so if we're talking, thumbs all the way down, our most extended field guards, lifting, like I said, this one, you can hold it straight at target, but because your thumbs are the tip, it's going to naturally kind of drop into a hanging point. Go ahead and let it do so. This is particularly good if you're looking to invite to the face and then parry, or alternatively, if you are in the course of being parried and you're moving up to get your tip across. If your thumb's the thumb, this can become very, very comfortable and very easy for you to launch good attacks off of the hinging action of your elbows or a slight lunge or things along those lines. But you also, especially up here, get the fun option of, comfortably at least, you can still do it down here, but comfortably, you can turn both thumbs back and now have the full harpoon grip. This can be quite nice for launching, well, not launching, but for long periods of engaging in the second row. Now, another thing you don't necessarily see all that often up high is going to be sort of shortened arms position. You do see this with pike as well as with bayonet, but the basic idea is that if I know I'm not going to necessarily be fighting all that much, or alternatively, I don't need to raise overhead, then being able to thrust over the shoulder of my fellows can be quite nice. And this is also somewhat in the same vein as taking a more Fenestra-like position, wherein my right hand is now on top, though you can certainly still do this same thing with your left hand on top by turning backward. This adds just a little bit more juice into your high position without necessarily opening you up as much. So if you don't have someone in front of you, but you wish to use this high position, going more this level doesn't quite open the same gap as up here. Alternatively, however, like I said, also here, same exact idea. It spirals in quite nicely. This spirals in quite nicely. You'll also see the right version, which is more often than not done with a shorter spear, or it feels a little more comfortable with a shorter spear, because you got to bring this across from you. But in essence, all I'm going to do is now, from here, same idea, I drive across with that haft, and I bring this through so that my hand is protecting me as I go. Like I said, it's a little awkward with a bigger spear, works wonders with a short spear. It feels one for one with the sword. Just some options for those high positions, really. Now, couching from a high position, that can be a little tricky, but it's definitely something you want to learn how to do. I plant, especially into an armpit or a hip, then to drive, I want to not just couch, but I also want to use my lead hand to gore. I want to lift it as I push it in. Same thing as well, if I land with thumbs to thumb, gore it in. And this one, especially since I can do a deeper hinge, it can be nice to push that arm downward and sort of lock it against my hip level rather than just into my armpit level, since I can afford to do so. But all that to say, stuff you'll understand. Now, our kind of final grip type I'm going to go over today is going to be loading, so at the shoulder pretty much. Now, this can seem very strange to do with a spear since there's no cutting end, but just because it doesn't have a cutting end doesn't mean it can't cut, right? And by this, I'm talking about in regards to, of course, true cross, or alternatively, a sort of more staff vampag. These can both be very, very nice for being able to apply overbinds. Now, this can be done in a couple different contexts. Of course, with thumb to thumb, I get a lot of strength in that strike. If a thrust is coming in, or a cut for that matter, I can put a lot of pressure into it and bring my tip forward. It plays exactly like the sword. With my thumbs to tip, it's a little more comfortable doing just a little bit of cross body, so letting myself do volta stabile and then stepping in. Difference between the two being, with my thumbs to thumb, I can get a lot more pressure, but I will want to step, so I'll usually end up playing a bit more wide. I leave the middle line, but my hands stay on it to hit. With thumbs to tip and using the turning of the hip, I can now remain on the middle line because I can have a tighter set aside, both of which are completely valid, and you should do both depending upon what you need. However, an often not spoken about attribute of this particular grip is that you can also use the other end to do the same thing. So this end, the Q end, if you've done a sort of the Lejeune poleaxe, is going to be particularly nice, not just in regards to launching attacks, but also in regards to parries. So if you don't have an axe head, it doesn't make a ton of sense for you to threaten with this hand high, so we'll ignore that for the moment. And instead talk about, I am reserving my spear for whatever reason. This can also be third ranker who suddenly needs to act, but when thrusts or cuts come in, I can use that butt end to bring this up and across and get some very, very nice parries. So I can go up. Alternatively, I can go over and across. That particular one is a very, very powerful parry. I refer to it as back axing, when you are striking the back of someone's hand. So you're going for right here on that staff, so it'll pop out of their hand. When you bring that spear point out of presence and they attack in, if you can get that kick, you will knock their spear quite a ways, and then you will be able to launch either an attack with the back end, or alternatively you can move in for throw. Or, if you get that knock aside, you can also, with a quick little turn, bring this up to your hip, and then execute a closer range technique. That one's one I like a lot. I haven't gotten to do it in a while, but it's a really, really lovely little combo. Your tip forward, you come step back, they come in with a thrust, kick that out of the way, bring it tight to yourself, and then execute your follow-up technique. Alternatively, you can do the same thing from the other side with your spear point if you wish to do the simpler version, that being defend and just go immediately in, but you will not have the advantage of being able to hit the back of their thrust unless you're fighting a left-hand person. So overall, pretty good position. Now, one other thing I want to talk about, and a very often unseen grip that really ties into that combo I just talked about, is a charged grip, or a short grip. Now, if we're talking about armor, this is one of the most important grips you can learn how to do with the spear. Reason being is that eventually, when everyone gets tired of, high-speed knitting, you will get close to each other. You've got your medium fights, where now you're using it a bit more like the sword or like an axe. And then when you get closer than that, someone has to make a choice. I can either keep using this as a lever to push things away, or I can rely on my armor and start using this as a dagger. So for this, really what you want to do is you want to have your hand, and I like to have it about to the point where my elbow is parallel with the tip. My other hand, same amount of space as I would normally have, and I can do this either way. I will say that if you have your thumbs to tip, you're going to be very, very good at putting that point where you want. You also tend to cover the armpit, so they won't have as easy of a time either turning you or getting up under yours if they're trying to do the same thing at the same time. However, you lose out on the option of, if you have thumb to thumb, I can use my elbow as a tool to defend or wedge in, and I also get just a little bit more strength in that particular grip for the loss of accuracy. Now, if we add that to the combination that I showed earlier, we get an even more fun transition. So we get defense here, and now we're also going to shorten as we step in, up, and I can plant that point into a hip or into an armpit or something along those lines. Now, once you're here, if they choose to run away, this is definitely a good time to use a nice extended turn of the hands to retreat, or alternatively to use a little bit of flung thrust action to push yourself back into a sort of medium grip, which can look like I'm here, I can't hit my target, I push my hands together, then I bring my hand back. So, all that is to say, just some options, right? I often don't see these things talked about, and I want to go into them in more detail, but I had some free time and it's been on the mind, so I've decided to just kind of ramble for a little bit, and hopefully someone will get some enjoyment or at least entertainment out of watching me walk my way through that mentally. But there's a lot of different things you can do with the spear. It's not just about poking, it's not just about whacking. It's often referred to as the queen of weapons for a good reason. There's a lot you can do from it, and if it's not working with you, it will work against you. Otherwise though, I will bring out some other content this week. I'll probably record stuff tomorrow, though it may be some slightly different things. But either way, thank you very, very much for watching. We'll go over some other techniques another time.